I spent 40 years building something out of nothing. No investors, no family inheritance. Just a pair of tired hands, a borrowed fryer, and the smell of onions in my clothes for 2 decades straight. Every square inch of those kitchens at LAX carries my fingerprints. And yet on the day my only son got married, I stood behind a swinging door in an apron, watching someone else smile beside him, like they had earned all of it. If you've ever poured your life into someone only to be erased with a smile, you'll understand why I did what I did next. My name is Lorraine Madsen. I'm 73 years old, and up until recently I was the founder and owner of one of the most successful airport dining chains on the West Coast. It didn't start out glamorous. I was 29 broke and recently divorced when I took a job serving coffee at a newsstand inside Terminal 5. The job paid just enough to keep me and my son fed. But I noticed what no one else seemed to see. Travelers didn't just want fast food. They wanted warmth. Something real. Something that reminded them of home. I started with a food cart, just soups and sandwiches. I cooked in my apartment and wheeled it into the employee hallway before sunrise. Eventually, the terminal manager let me rent a proper corner. I named it after my grandmother Elise. It grew. 1 spot turned into 3, then 5. By the time I turned 60, I had a team of 80 employees across multiple terminals. We served fresh meals to thousands every day. But more than that, we became a place people trusted. Families heading off to funerals, couples flying out for honeymoons, soldiers passing through. We fed all of them. And every step of the way, I brought Jeffrey along. He was my only son. I used to sit him on a crate near the prep sink while I rolled dough. When he was old enough, he handled the register. Later, I paid for his business degree, hired him as an intern, promoted him to operations manager. By the time I stepped back, he was running day to day without needing me in the room. It was what I wanted, what any parent wants. To pass something down, to build a legacy. I thought I had done it right. I thought I had raised someone who understood not just how the business worked, but why it mattered. I didn't know then how wrong I was. The invitation arrived on a Thursday morning. Thick envelope, gold lettering. The kind of stationery that says money before you even open it. I smiled when I saw it. Jeffrey always liked to go big. He used to practice fake acceptance speeches in the mirror as a kid. I imagined it was a traditional invite. Mother of the groom, front row seat, maybe a small speech if I was lucky. When I opened it, the first thing I noticed wasn't my name. It was the title underneath. Kitchen Logistics Coordinator. At first I thought it was a mistake, some kind of placeholder that hadn't been changed. I flipped through the rest of the packet. Travel information, dress code, seating chart. There it was again in bold print, Lorraine Madsen, Kitchen Logistics Coordinator. I read it 3 times, each word colder than the last. I set the invitation down and walked to the sink, turning the faucet on without needing water, just to hear something else. My eyes drifted toward the small frame on the windowsill. Me and Jeffrey, 10 years old, standing behind the Elise's counter with powdered sugar on our faces. That little boy had once told me I was his whole world, said he wanted to build restaurants with me forever. I picked up the envelope again, hoping for a note, a joke. A postscript. There was nothing. That evening, I checked my email. Darla had sent a mass message to all vendors and key staff, thanking them for their roles in the upcoming event. I was copied along with the catering crew and floral coordinators. Her words were gracious, formal. She referred to me once near the end as a vital support figure behind our event logistics. Support figure, not mother, not founder. Just support. There was a photo attached, a preview from the engagement shoot, Jeffrey in a navy suit, Darla in a fitted ivory dress, standing in the middle of the tarmac like she owned the runway. She looked radiant, confident, The kind of woman who gets what she wants and makes no apologies for it. In the background, blurry but still visible, was the entrance to one of my original locations. The name had been partially cropped. It didn't say Elise's anymore. It said Darla's Table. I closed the email. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after the lights were off. No anger, not yet. Just a quiet disbelief. A weight starting to settle in my chest. I wanted to believe there was a misunderstanding, a detail I had missed, a reason behind it all. But the truth had already started to whisper, and I wasn't ready to hear it yet. The morning of the wedding, the sky over Los Angeles was washed in that soft grey light that comes before the sun takes over. I arrived early. Habit more than anything. I've never been late for a kitchen call in my life, even when it's a wedding, even when it's my own son's. The venue was sleek, a rooftop space overlooking the coastline, all white chairs and glass railings. The kind of place where everything smells like citrus and money. Staff bustled around with earpieces and clipboards. I carried a garment bag with the dress I had chosen weeks ago. Navy blue, pressed and simple, nothing flashy, just something dignified. I had worn it once before at a civic award dinner where Jeffrey accepted a small business honor in my name. A young woman with a clipboard and a headset greeted me near the service entrance. "Lorraine Madsen, right?" she asked, already flipping through a list. She didn't wait for my reply. "Here's your station assignment. We've set up a prep table behind the main line. Darla said you'd prefer to be hands-on." She handed me an apron. Black canvas. On the upper left corner, stitched in fine white thread, was my name. Not Mum, not founder, just Lorraine, like I was one of the catering staff. I stood there for a long second before nodding, took the apron, hung my dress on a low hook in the back kitchen and tied the strings behind me like I had 1,000 times before. My hands moved on their own. Guests began to arrive. I caught glimpses of them through the swinging door, suits and pearls, laughter rolling through the courtyard. I recognized some of them. Old vendors, former partners, people who once shook my hand and called me a visionary. No one looked toward the kitchen. Mid-afternoon, Jeffrey stepped into the back hallway. He didn't come all the way in, just leaned through the door already in his tux, adjusting the cufflinks I bought him last Christmas. His eyes passed over me. He gave a quick smile, the kind you give to someone bringing out the hors d'oeuvres. Then he was gone again. No words, no thank you. Not even a nod. An hour later, the ceremony began. I listened to it from the prep sink. Darla's voice carried louder than the rest. She sounded polished, practiced. She thanked everyone for being there, for supporting their journey. She named vendors, designers, mentors. She paused briefly before adding, "And of course to our kitchen logistics lead Lorraine, who made today's coordination seamless." Applause followed, not for a mother, not for a legacy, for a staff role. I didn't cry, not then. I just kept wiping down the cutting board, breathing in slow, steady rhythms like I had trained myself to do for years. It wasn't the work that hurt. I've always loved the work. It was being invisible in a room I helped build. A room where my son stood at the center and I wasn't even in the frame. And for the first time, I wondered if I ever really had been. By late afternoon, the kitchen had quieted into a rhythm. The appetizers were done, the main course lined up. I wiped my hands on the same apron that now felt less like a uniform and more like a curtain drawn between who I was and who I had become. I stayed in the back, moving quietly between prep trays and storage like a shadow. From where I stood, I could see a narrow sliver of the reception through the swinging door. Candles lit the edges of the patio. White string lights crossed overhead like stars that had come down for the occasion. Guests were smiling, drinks in hand, The kind of joy that floats when the music is just right and no one's watching the clock. Then Jeffrey stood to make a toast. He held his glass high, his other hand resting gently on Darla's lower back. His smile stretched wide as he addressed the crowd. He thanked the planning team, the vendors, the decorators. He even joked with the photographer who had apparently lost the lens cap twice that day. Laughter bubbled around the courtyard. But he never mentioned me. Not once. I leaned slightly forward to hear better. My hands stayed busy, peeling the corners of a napkin, the motion steady, like my mind needed something to keep it from breaking open. Then the photographer called out for the family photo. I stayed behind, assuming they meant Jeffrey's side, Darla's side, grandparents, siblings. But something tugged at me, and I stepped closer to the hallway, just enough to see them line up near the floral arch. Jeffrey's arm around Darla, her parents flanking one side, his old college friends behind. Even a few of my former business partners were there. But I was not. I looked around, wondering if someone had asked for me, if there had been a glance toward the kitchen. Nothing. Just then, someone opened the walk-in freezer. The door swung wide and a burst of light caught the reflection in the metal wall. It was the group photo frozen in the mirrored surface. A flash, smiles, all of them together. And in that reflection at the very edge was me, alone in the back, apron on, hands at my sides, watching. That moment stayed still inside me. I returned to my station, laid a clean towel over the prep area, and stood there as the music shifted into something soft and slow. A love song from years ago. One Jeffrey used to sing in the car when he was little, holding my hand at red lights, like it was the only thing keeping the world in place. Now there wasn't even room for me in a photograph. I wasn't hurt by the lack of thanks or even the title. What broke me was that he never thought to look for me in the room, that I had become invisible not by accident, but by design. And somehow I had allowed it. The morning after the wedding, I sat at my kitchen table in silence. The air still smelled faintly of lemon oil and roasted rosemary from the leftover trays I had brought home. I hadn't slept. My body ached in places that weren't physical. I reached for my laptop, not out of habit, but out of something else. A quiet itch. I logged into the dashboard I hadn't touched in weeks. When I handed daily operations to Jeffrey, I told myself it was time, that I had earned rest, that trusting him was part of letting go. Now I wasn't so sure. The interface opened slowly, same password I'd used for years. My name still hovered on the corner of the screen. Founder. I clicked into the financials expecting a routine scan. What I found instead stopped me cold. A new expense category had been added. Legacy transition. Under it, a string of transfers had been processed in the last 2 months. Consulting fees, contract restructuring, rebranding materials. I opened the attached documents, all signed by Jeffrey. None of them had my signature. Not a single one required my approval. But they moved funds from primary accounts tied to our oldest locations. The ones we had built with cash and sweat. I scrolled faster, heart picking up pace. One file caught my eye. A consulting report prepared by a firm I'd never heard of. In it, recommendations for phased legacy dissolution were outlined. A line item read, "Transition founder equity into strategic silent holdings." I kept reading. The term silent holdings meant something very specific. It meant keeping me on paper but stripping my authority. It meant locking me out while maintaining the illusion of inclusion. A legacy ghost. I closed the file and leaned back in my chair. My fingers were trembling slightly. Not from fear, from something sharper. A wound I hadn't seen forming beneath the surface. There had been a message last month from Howard, a long-time employee. He had texted a short note. You sure you want to let go just yet? I had brushed it off, told myself he was being sentimental. Now I understood. The plan hadn't been spontaneous. It was structured, timed, signed. The wedding had been the last act, not the beginning, the final seal on a shift already set in motion. I opened the old metal drawer beside the desk, pulled out the original articles of incorporation. My name, my authority, still binding, for now. But I knew then what I hadn't wanted to believe before. I hadn't just been left out of the photo. I was being written out of the story entirely. And the pen was in my son's hand. I sat with the documents for hours. My eyes scanned the legal language, the line items, the signatures that didn't include mine. Somewhere in the middle of it all, the betrayal settled into something more still, less like a storm and more like a decision. I opened the file cabinet that hadn't been touched in years. I pulled out the original shareholder agreement, the corporate charter, the estate planning binder. Everything was intact. My lawyer, Michael Reed, had helped me set it all up after my 60th birthday. He was smart, cautious, and meticulous. The language we used had been deliberate. I never granted Jeffrey majority control. Not legally, not structurally. What I gave him was trust. And trust, as it turned out, wasn't binding in court. I reviewed the documents again slowly. The bylaws gave me final say over all equity transfers, profit distributions, and brand usage. I had never invoked those clauses, never needed to. But they were there, buried in plain sight. In the estate plan, I had once named Jeffrey the primary heir. He was listed to inherit the company shares, real estate holdings, intellectual property, and the 3 retirement accounts I had built steadily over 4 decades. His name was on everything. That evening, I changed it. I called Michael and requested a full amendment package. He didn't ask questions, just said, "Give me 24 hours." While I waited, I drafted a new beneficiary letter and outlined my intentions. The assets wouldn't disappear. They would be redirected. Instead of passing to Jeffrey, everything would transfer into a non-profit trust. Its mission would be simple and public to support small-scale hospitality workers at major transit hubs. Scholarships, housing grants. Medical coverage for kitchen crews who too often lived without any of it. The restaurants would stay open. The recipes would stay the same. The signs would remain in the terminals. But the ownership would shift. Quietly. Legally. Irreversibly. I didn't need to confront him. I didn't need to shout or explain or make a speech about legacy. The law would speak for me. The next day, I mailed the amendment packet by certified post. I kept the receipt. Then I went to the storage unit near Inglewood and pulled out the framed newspaper articles, the old menu prototypes, and the photo of Jeffrey and me in front of our first booth. I took them home, dusted the glass, and packed them into a new box. A personal archive. Not for him, for me. That night, I sat with the lights off and the television muted. The apartment was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't ache, because I had remembered who I was. Not someone erased, but someone who built. And now someone who could rebuild again, without needing to ask permission. It was early afternoon when my phone rang. I recognized the number before it lit the screen. Jeffrey had never liked texting. He preferred to talk when he wanted something. I let it ring once before answering. His voice came through smooth, polished, the tone of someone trained in negotiation. He started with small talk, asking about my health, about the neighborhood. Then, as expected, the turn came. He mentioned the asset transfer papers, said he had been expecting them weeks ago, told me the firm needed everything finalized for the next quarter. I didn't respond right away. He kept talking, filling the silence. Said he wanted to make sure we were on the same page, that the legacy we built deserved continuity. said he had big plans for the next chapter and was excited to carry it forward. I finally said, "Plans have changed." There was a pause, a full second longer than comfortable. Then his voice tightened, but he kept it cordial. He asked if I needed help reviewing the transition, that maybe there had been confusion, that he could walk me through the structure. I said no confusion here. Another silence. Then I heard it, a soft shuffle in the background. Darla's voice filtered but clear. She asked him if I was calling to check on kitchen schedules, said she was short a sous chef for a corporate tasting next week. Maybe I wanted the slot. Jeffrey didn't mute fast enough. He apologized, said things were hectic. But the tone had shifted. The warmth cracked at the edges. He sounded more like a manager trying to recover a deal than a son speaking to his mother. I told him I wouldn't be attending any more meetings, that my role had concluded. He hesitated, then asked what that meant. I didn't answer. Instead, I wished him good luck and hung up. I stared at the phone in my lap for a while. Not angry, not shaken, just clearer. That call confirmed what I already knew. Darla wasn't just the bride. She was part of the blueprint. The language in the restructuring, the vendor realignments, even the way the public brand had softened into something glossier. It had her fingerprints. She wasn't loud or rude or careless. She was calculated, smooth, the kind of smart that gets what it wants by smiling while the ink dries. And Jeffrey had chosen her methods. Not accidentally, not reluctantly. He had welcomed them. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, traffic hummed down Sepulveda like always. Planes took off in the distance, one every 90 seconds. Life moved on, indifferent. But inside, I was no longer waiting. The truth was out in the open now. I didn't need confrontation. I had already made the only call that mattered, and it wasn't the one on the phone. The knock on the door came just after 10 in the morning. I hadn't been expecting anyone, but the rhythm of it was familiar. 3 short, then 1 long. I opened the door and there stood Howard, holding a paper bag in one hand and a small framed photo in the other. He looked older than I remembered. His hair was almost entirely grey now, and the deep lines around his mouth had settled like permanent creases. But his eyes were the same, sharp, warm, present. I stepped aside and let him in. He didn't say much at first, just placed the photo on the table and the bag beside it. Inside was a cinnamon loaf from a bakery in Westchester we used to stop by on Thursdays when inventory ran long. That memory hit me harder than I expected. We sat in the kitchen, no need for pleasantries. Howard was one of the first hires I ever made. Back in the early 90s, before we even had uniforms. He had worked through every level. Dishwasher line, cook shift, lead trainer. He stayed even when others left for better pay. Loyalty was his default. He pointed to the photo. It was an old staff picture taken in front of our second terminal spot. Everyone wore mismatched hats and crooked smiles. My handwriting on the back read Elise's Crew, March 1995. Howard said the photo had been tucked away in the break room cabinet, left behind during the recent renovations. I asked how things were. He hesitated, then told me straight. The staff had been dwindling, long-timers were being pushed out quietly, schedules were shifted, roles restructured, new hires came in with different contracts, less pay, no benefits. Morale was low. Darla had introduced a new management model. Efficiency was the word on every memo. Human connection had vanished from the floor. He looked at me, not with judgment, but with that quiet weight old friends carry when truth needs saying. They miss you, he said, not just your presence, your way of doing things. I sat with that, not out of pride, but out of recognition. This wasn't just about ownership or names on papers. It was about the culture we had built, the families who had counted on us, The holiday shifts we covered for each other, the birthday cakes in the break room, the kid who grew up visiting his dad at work, now old enough to apply for a job himself. That was the legacy I had almost let slip away. I asked Howard to help me gather some information, staff names, stories, what people needed now, not to build something new but to restore what had been quietly dismantled. He nodded without asking for details. Before leaving, he said one more thing. You built something with heart. It still beats, just needs someone to hear it again. After he left, I looked at the photo one more time, not for nostalgia, but as a reminder. What we had was never about profits, it was about people, and they were still worth fighting for. I chose the venue carefully, a quiet restaurant tucked between two terminal access roads near LAX, one of the earliest spots we partnered with. It had been renovated over the years, but the bones remained the same. Exposed brick, low lighting, a faint scent of coffee and old wood. Familiar. Grounded. I sent the invitation in plain white envelopes. No logo, no hint of agenda. Just a handwritten note. Dinner to honor 40 years of service. Join me. Lorraine. They arrived 5 minutes early. Jeffrey in a slate-grey suit, Darla in cream silk with gold earrings that caught the light. She wore the expression of someone expecting good news. He looked composed, the kind of calm that comes from thinking you're in control. I stood to greet them, offered a polite nod. No hugs, no warmth, just presence. We sat at a small table near the window. I had asked the staff to keep it quiet, no fuss. We ordered quickly the kind of dishes we used to taste test together. Jeffrey made small talk about expansion plans, upcoming conferences, a new line of seasonal menus. Darla chimed in, speaking of potential partnerships, branding efforts, and how they envisioned the next decade. I let them speak. When the plates arrived, I waited, let the silence settle just enough. Then I unfolded a single page from my bag and placed it on the table. It was the charter for the new non-profit trust. Their names weren't on it. The restaurants, the accounts, the intellectual property, all of it had been reassigned. Not to them, to the trust. A structure built to preserve the legacy and support the people who carried it forward. Staff would remain employed, benefits would be expanded, and profits would be redirected into community development and scholarships for children of hospitality workers. Jeffrey stared at the paper, blinking slowly. Darla went pale, her fork frozen halfway to her plate. I spoke clearly, not with anger, but finality. This was never about punishment. It was about restoration, about protecting what mattered when others forgot. Jeffrey leaned back, lips parting like he might object, but nothing came out. Darla placed her napkin on the table with careful precision, her posture still perfect, but her eyes narrowed. I continued. This trust will ensure that what we built stays rooted in the values that began it. Names change, control shifts, but meaning doesn't have to disappear. Neither of them touched their food. The server came by, unsure whether to interrupt. I smiled gently and asked for the check. Jeffrey cleared his throat, tried to say something about misunderstanding, about being left out of the decision. I looked at him not with resentment, but clarity. I didn't leave you out. You walked away long before the paperwork ever caught up. And now it was just catching up, quietly, legally, irrevocably. The dinner ended without dessert. The silence after the dinner lingered longer than I expected. Days passed. No calls, no emails, no follow-ups from lawyers or intermediaries, just stillness. Like the moment after a plane takes off and the cabin steadies. I didn't go looking for reactions. I had said what needed saying, made decisions that no longer needed defense. But that quiet carried weight, the kind you feel in your chest before it reaches your ears. Then one afternoon, Jeffrey showed up at my door. No warning, just a knock. No rhythm, no old code, just firm and singular. I opened it. He stood there with both hands in his pockets, not in a suit this time, but in an old college sweatshirt. His shoulders rounded a bit, like the years had caught up to him in just a few days. He asked if we could talk. I nodded and stepped aside. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same place he once did homework, while I prepped inventory sheets late into the night. He looked around, almost surprised the place hadn't changed. Maybe he expected to see bitterness in the decor. I had nothing to prove. He spoke first, said he didn't mean for things to go that way, said Darla had ideas and he let them steer too much, that he thought I was ready to step back, that he thought I didn't want to be involved anymore, that maybe he'd misunderstood what legacy meant to me. I listened, not to forgive, but to understand the story he was telling himself. He said he didn't know how to fix it. I looked at him, really looked. And in that moment, I didn't see the executive. I didn't even see the little boy who used to fall asleep in the back of the walk-in freezer on long shifts. I saw a man who had built a version of himself that didn't include the parts of me that mattered. I told him the trust wasn't about revenge. It was about remembering who we were before ambition made things complicated, about protecting the people who helped us get here, about making sure the story stayed honest. He nodded. His eyes didn't meet mine. Then he stood. No hug, no grand apology, just a pause at the door. As he left, I said one more thing. You used to hold my hand at the end of the night, no matter how tired we were, no matter how messy the day had been. You always reached for it. That mattered to me. He paused, his back still turned, then walked away. I closed the door gently. There was grief in that moment. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The grief of letting go of the version of someone you once believed in. Not out of anger, but clarity. Some people grow apart from who they were meant to become. And some of us have to accept that even when it comes with silence. It was the kind of morning where the light barely moved through the curtains. Still and grey, like the sky had forgotten what colour was. I sat at my desk with a cup of weak coffee and an old legal pad I had saved for years, the kind with faint blue lines and the smell of dust and ink. I opened the top drawer and pulled out a folder I hadn't touched in nearly a decade. Inside were papers I'd written back when I first drew up the estate plan, full of crossed-out names, margin notes and arrows that had changed direction more than once. There were drafts of letters too, one to Jeffrey, one to the team, one to myself. I unfolded the one addressed to me. It was written in a firmer hand, from a time when I thought legacy meant making sure my son never struggled. Back then, I believed success was something you passed down in neat packages, a name on a building, a signature on a check, a seat at the table. But now I knew better. Legacy wasn't about blood or inheritance. It was about how you used your power to hold space for others, to give more than you took, to leave something behind that helped people breathe easier. So I took out a fresh page and began writing again. This time I wrote slowly with care. I wrote to the people who had stood in my kitchen on Christmas morning when the ovens broke down, to the ones who covered shifts when someone's child got sick, to the ones who showed up early, stayed late, and treated each other like family. I named them. I wrote that the remaining assets in my name, the pension fund, the last real estate deed, the personal accounts would be divided among them, structured legally, cleanly, fairly, not for show, but because they earned it. I wasn't choosing them over Jeffrey. I was choosing what felt right. These were people who didn't just build my business. They carried it through holidays, deaths, layoffs, recessions. They were never going to make headlines, but they mattered more than anyone ever gave them credit for. I folded the letter and placed it in a new envelope, sealed it, and labeled the outside in pen final. Then I slid it into the same drawer. I didn't feel sadness, just a quiet sort of peace. There's a difference between letting go and giving up. I had done the first. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the ground steady beneath me. Not because someone gave me permission, but because I finally remembered that I never needed it. The airport felt different than it used to. Not louder or busier, just changed. The kind of change that comes when time smooths out the corners of places once sharp with memory. I walked through Terminal 6, slowly taking in the polished tile floors and the hum of rolling luggage. I hadn't been here in months, not since everything shifted. It used to be that every step I took through this place was layered with responsibility. Orders to approve, staff to greet, problems to solve. Now I was just a woman with nowhere to be. And somehow that felt like freedom. I passed Gate 61, where our first small cafe had once stood. It was now a larger space, open-air seating, newer branding. But near the corner, tucked behind a row of plants, I saw something that made me stop. A young employee, maybe in her 20s, was on a step stool reaching up to hang a framed sign. I couldn't see the full design from where I stood, but I caught the last few words as she adjusted it into place. Madsen's Kitchen established 1991. She turned, slightly noticed me watching, and smiled. "You're Mrs. Lorraine, right?" I nodded, my throat tight. "We just got the original logo back from storage. We thought it deserved to go up again." She went back to her work without another word, and I kept walking. The glass doors at the end of the concourse opened automatically. The wind outside was cool, just strong enough to lift a loose strand of hair from my forehead. I paused for a moment at the edge of the curb, watching a plane ascend in the distance. No one was clapping. No one was watching. But I knew. That name on the wall wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who stayed, everyone who gave something real. I didn't need to own anything to know I had left something behind. I adjusted my coat, stepped off the curb, and disappeared into the crowd. And that was enough. If you've ever had to walk away to protect your peace, I hope this story reminded you that dignity doesn't need an audience. Sometimes the most powerful choices are made in silence. If this touched something in you, take a deep breath and hold on to it. You're not alone. Let me know what moment in the story stayed with you the most. Thank you for listening.